You are listening to Filthy Armenian Adventures, and this is your host, Alec Mohibian. And today, we are doing almost 4 hours on Somerset Maugham, William Somerset Maugham. And they are passionate hours, because we are living in the nuclear fallout of one battle after another. The Chernobyl of American cinema, auteured by Pamela Anderson, and it's important to get real clear-headed about the role and meaning of art in our lives. Turns out, few have written about that subject with more authority and clarity and wit than Somerset Maugham. And a lot of people don't know this, because Maugham has been marginalized by critics ever since day one for being too popular, too entertaining, too smart. There's only so much the experts can forgive. I have always wanted to pay tribute to Maugham for a number of reasons. He was, as he called the Spanish captain quoted by the Armenian bishop at the end of Don Fernando, a high priest of adventure. He had a keen and very funny sense of human idiocy, which is to say human nature, possibly aided by his mortifying realization in his 20s that he was home sweet homo. And yet, his brutal awareness of reality, which made him so lonely, never got his spirits down, at least not where it counted on the page. He was uncommonly forgiving of the idiocy he noticed. And so he is a trusty guide to exotic lands, not the least exotic of them, ourselves. Here is an episode about why Somerset Maugham matters, and art for art's sake does not. Hey, this is your host, Alec Mohibian, with a quick message before we continue. Based in that great but very troubled place, Hollywood, California, Filthy Armenian Adventures is an interdimensional travel program that takes you deep into the cultural mysteries of our time. In search of truth, in search of gold, in search of lost friends and unsung heroes, in search of John Galt's motor. This show is your antidote to the black pill. This is your guide to the places, the personalities, the ideas and creations the enemies of man don't want you to know. This is your techno-noir investigation into the good, the evil, and the God hiding under our noise. This is where you get the news before it breaks, before it blows, before it burns. The show is supported entirely by patrons at patreon.com/filthyarmenian. As a patron, you get access to twice as many adventures, including the most important ones, the ones with the real facts. Plus, regular brief smoke break spiritual reports on topics of the day. As a patron, you also get exclusive access to our Smash live events. Ask anyone who's attended one, and they will tell you it's an experience you'll never forget. It's very easy to keep Filthy Armenian Adventures alive. You can still listen to the show on your favorite app like Spotify or Apple, and you can do so with the pride that you're putting a little bit of money where your soul is. More patrons means more fuel, more topics, more investigations, more miracles, more secret locations, and forbidden territories around the world, and the world that is Los Angeles, our post-apocalyptic headquarters. It means we'll be able to track down more enchanting figures in the landscape, dare them to abandon their masks
schedule too much.
and join our
I'm such a
quest
night owl, you know.
out
I'm
of the
like
darkness
crazy
and
night
into
owl. Are
a
these
golden
usually up early.
age.
Yeah, that's
Patreon.com
Well, it works for this. It's perfect.
Filthy
It's perfect
Armenian.
Perfect for
Thank you for
Australia
being
to
one of the
to
good
LA
ones.
broadcasting
And enjoy
purposes.
the show.
This is like the ideal time, the podcast, really, for me, because then I can get it out of the way early in the morning and I get to drink coffee while I'm podcasting.
Yeah, that's always a bonus. You are listening to Filthy Armenian Adventures. This is your host, Alec Mohibian, and I am joined by two wonderful gentlemen from Down Under, co-hosts of the Getting Lit podcast about, you guessed it, literature. Matthew Sini and Matt Fresca. Welcome to the show, Sini and Fresca.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
We have gathered here today to pay tribute to a writer that I have long wanted to, celebrate on this show and talk about. He's kind of a towering figure in 20th century English language letters. He was maybe one of the most, if not the most, successful professional writers of the period where you could use that term. I mean, it's hard to think of. I don't think anyone was more successful than he was. Like across three different media, three different forms, I should say. He enjoyed an immense amount of success and all the wealth and fame that came with it, and so became like this very central figure and celebrity back when literature was still the thing to be famous at. I still think that beyond even the movies, because he really peaked in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, and even started out at the 10s. But that's when it was still like the thing to be as a writer. I mean, his villa, the Villa Mauresque, I think it's called, in Nice, or in the south of France, that he was basically Buckingham Palace South. It was like everyone was visiting, the queens, kings, all the great and the celebrated were regulars there. And he was in the middle of everything, and he traveled everywhere, and he made it a huge part of his stories to write about the characters in the colonies and Malaysia and the South Seas, all over the place. And he started out as a playwright, a very successful playwright, stopped writing plays and moved on to novels. And ultimately his greatest success was at short stories, I think, literarily. And he also wrote some very underrated and very valuable nonfiction. We're going to talk about today his novel Cakes and Ale, and his nonfiction sort of memoir, intellectual memoir, that he wrote at the end of his fiction career. He decided to complete the pattern he had set out for himself. He had set out to live out with the book called The Summing Up. And it's really a smart book. I've read it now for the third time, probably the final time. But the first two times are just, you're kind of dazzled by his intelligence. And then this third time you can actually pick up on the subtleties of every little thing, deceptively simple thing he writes. Cakes and Ale I've selected for this, and I've asked the gentleman to read because it was recommended to me by my trusted authority as his best novel. And by multiple people, they think that it's his best novel. Of Human Bondage is a more famous novel. The Razor's Edge is another more famous novel. But Cakes and Ale is a comedy or a satire of the literary scene and the literary world, which is, I think, probably going to come off as the more perfect achievement of his novels. It's really funny, and it's strangely relevant, despite the fact that there is no literary scene or circle to speak of anymore. But just any sort of cultural scene involving writerly type people with clout involved, such as Twitter, this will feel very delicious to those of you who have tacoed in this realm. So, Cakes and Ale and The Summing Up are the two books that I've assigned, and we'll talk about other elements of Somerset Maugham and kind of what made him tick. I have noticed that there's this trend when it comes to Somerset Maugham of people really, it's been a long trend. It's been from the middle of his career. As he put it, I'll quote, I'll quote as he put it in The Summing Up. One moment. In my 20s, the critics said I was brutal. In my 30s, they said I was flippant. In my 40s, they said I was cynical. In my 50s, they said I was competent. And now in my 60s, they say I am superficial. So immediately, William Somerset Maugham achieved a big popular success with one of his plays. The intelligentsia dumped him. He used to be a part of the intelligentsia. He would write articles for like a certain publication, and his first two plays were like very intellectual plays that were put on by the Stage Society, and that was considered a very prestigious calling card if you were among the smart set. And they basically dumped him hard after he became successful and popular, and from then on he was sort of never taken seriously by the critics, with very, very few minimal exceptions. And strangely, that echoes through the ages. Christopher Hitchens wrote this horrible hatchet job of him in The Atlantic, in his literary column for The Atlantic, some 15, 17, 18 years ago in the mid-2000s. Just a complete and total shit job that really was did not reflect well on Christopher Hitchens. Of course, we all know Christopher Hitchens is no stranger to mommy issues, so maybe they were excited. They were excited somehow by Somerset Maugham. Recently, I saw that I saw that Bronze Age Pervert covered him on his show, and he hadn't ever read him before, and he'd read a few stories, and he didn't really get it. There's a certain barrier, which is that it's so, at the same time, he's so readable, and he's such a smooth writer that you assume he must not be very profound. It's the same bias that has dogged him since the early days. It is incorrect, and once you actually read his nonfiction, you realize that he's about as smart as a writer has ever been. He's one of the Ray writers. I call him Ray writers, RAE, right about everything. He's basically right about everything. There's exceptions, obviously, but he has that kind of intelligence, which is not the ultimate literary value. I think that Raymond Chandler probably put it best, and I'll find what Raymond Chandler said and quote it later, but I think his analysis of Maugham was probably the most accurate. But I wanted to ask you guys, let's start with your relationship with Willie Maugham and your thoughts on Cakes and Ale.
Well, I, like you, had mostly been exposed to his short stories, and I found them very impressive. I think I first encountered them at university when we were. It was weird, my first encounter with him, because I forget what the short story collection was, but it was sort of like short stories about his time in the East. And it was really funny because it was given as an example of, because when I went to university and I was studying electives in literature and stuff like that, it was at the height of the postmodern bullshit. So it was like a subject that was sort of centered around Orientalism. So this book that was assigned as a piece of modern Orientalism, because it was all the stories were set in the East or the Pacific or something like that. And I just remember being because it was sort of framed, wasn't necessarily framed back then as this is bad because it's Orientalist, but there was a little bit of an undertone of that. but I was just reading these stories and like these are excellent. Like so like it was framed to you in this sort of problematic way, but I was like, these are really good fucking stories. And he especially in the stories, but also in Cakes and Ale, I noticed as well. I haven't read I've read a lot of his plays as well because I used to be a playwright and like but like Maugham, I got kind of gave it up. I sort of aged out of it. But like I read a lot of his plays and found his same in similarly in the short stories and in Cakes and Ale. His strength, I think, is yeah, he's really smart, like you say, Alec, but he's also like an almost Holmesian level of observational skill. Like he really like gets at what humans are all about, or like different types of humans, different classes, all of that stuff. He just clocks it. Like it, and it's just so perfectly rendered too. There's no like bullshit. Nothing gets in the way of that observation. It's just really clear-eyed. And if that's what you want out of literature, you've got like an entire back catalogue of this sort of stuff and it's all like that. He never, the king never misses, like, so yeah, it's great.
It's always tea time when that clock's in the room.
That's right.
If that makes any sense. I don't know this.
Probably makes sense to us, but maybe not to Fresca.
I think I can figure it out.
I'm taking all this at third hand. I'm not familiar with the sources of this terminology at all. I just do my best to make it, to piece things together from a distance. Matt, what's your background with Mr. Maugham?
Well, my background is basically I just always remember seeing his books in like thrift stores, and I was always reading it as warm with I dyslexically split the M upside down. And so one day I saw a copy and it was like Maugham, and I was like, oh, this has got like a typo on the spine. But I never like bought them because it's, when you just see the same name over and over again, you just think, oh, it's probably just some like, well, that stuff I just clocked as being like, yeah, it's probably super antiquated and boring. It'd be like reading the Forsyth saga, which possibly is very good for all I know. But it wasn't until like kind of recently I got curious about it. I think it was like hearing something about like he'd written a story called The Magician about Aleister Crowley, and he was like basically shredded Crowley and like what he thought of him in that book. And so I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. And then I remember like William Burroughs was trashing him in another book, so I was kind of like, all right, maybe this guy is all right. And then obviously for this,
invariably, he attracts the worst people to hate him. Yeah.
Yeah, and so then this book is the first I've ever read of him. Oh, and the other thing I guess was David Mamet, when he was on our podcast, was singing his praises. So I kind of like, it's one of those names that recently has kind of like conspired to like get me interested. And so yeah, this is my first one that I read, and yeah, I'm more pilled now.
Good. I listened. Of course, you guys in a huge coup. You had David Mamet on recently to talk about his new novel and just to talk, and it was a great episode of your podcast. And I remember him talking about Maugham in irreverent tones, and I was like, yeah, of course, it makes total sense that David Mamet, himself a vastly successful consummate storyteller, would worship Maugham. They speak the same language, they think in the same terms, they have the same aesthetic sense of entertainment, of the rudiments of storytelling, of drama. They have the same respect for their craft, and they have the same, I think, disdain for the more kind of mystic, hoodoo kind of form of literature. I'm using these terms sloppily, but they're very old school in their sense of craft, and they share that. And again, this is in some circles the ultimate insult, the ultimate literary insult, the word that is both in Cakes and Ale, and that I quote, that Maugham used in that passage I quoted earlier, and that is deployed very devastatingly in Cakes and Ale, the word competent. That's the ultimate killer of one's literary prestige, is to be thought of as competent.
Yeah, that was like I read a lot of that criticism, like contemporary with him, and I didn't read the Hitchens one, but I've read others. Yeah, it's always the damning with faint praise of like competent. He knows how to assemble something, you know, that will appeal to the reader or whatever. And I feel like and he's often yeah, it's often like variations on competent, well constructed, things like that that are very like craftsman-like, and that's something that Maugham as well sort of admit to, and he would kind of internalize this criticism. But I think he's so much more than that because he's very modest about like his abilities and stuff, and says, I'm not this like virtuoso with prose or whatever. I read I was I read a quote from Anthony Burgess, who I have complicated thoughts about. But like he said something like similar to what you were saying, Alec, where he was saying, oh, he's sort of competent, but what was the word? It was something like innutritious.
Nutritious.
Yeah, like in that it doesn't nourish or something like
Ah,
that is what he was kind of claiming. And then the gave no evidence for that other than reflecting on Maugham's biography. Like his work is kind of good, but like Maugham, hard to love. And then he sort of starts bringing in his illegitimate child and all of that sort of stuff. And so yeah, yeah,
well, that's
it's a
something
real
to get
thing.
into. That's something to get into because it was the sort of it was a significant fact of Mom's life, and it's one that he also darkly self-analyzed. Although I don't have unfortunately the key passage before me because it's in his book Don Fernando, which I gave away to somebody. He has a brilliant analysis in when I say brilliant, I mean it's quite an astounding analysis of El Greco in that book, Don Fernando, which is a nonfiction book about Spain in its golden age. Very good book, by the way, and it ends on a very interesting review of a book by an Armenian bishop as like the ultimate, as a containing. He finds this like this travelogue of an Armenian bishop in the 1400s, which contains a quotation from a Spanish captain, which Mom believes summarizes the real Spanish character in its golden age, the greatness of Spain. And so he has like the last 5 pages of that book are all about this Armenian bishop's travelogue. It's really something. I wrote an article about this. But earlier in the book, he has an analysis of El Greco, who he considers to be a genius, in which he basically, again, reads, clocks the defect of the homosexual defect for an artist. And he has like this, I'll find it and quote it. I'll add it into this episode because it's really quite a rundown of why the homosexual is basically, as an artist, the homosexual defect basically precludes, hampers the homosexual from being a great artist almost all the time. His exceptions are El Greco and Shakespeare, a couple things here and there, but he's also, in the case of El Greco, he's citing it as a defect, and it's really something. And he himself realized late in life, late being in his mid-20s, that he was not 1/4 queer and 3/4 straight, but rather 3/4 queer and 1/4 straight, as he put it. And he ended up having a tumultuous homosexual life fell in love with this guy named Gerald, who he was in the ward in World War I, that I think was, he was like, he was injured in World War I, and Mom was taking care of him, and he fell in love with him, and he was this American, like, just wild, narcissistic daredevil, sexually omnivorous. You can totally see it. You can totally see and he was actually very helpful to Mom in his travels, because he would be the one who'd socialize with everybody easily. He would have that charisma, get all their stories, which Mom would, convert into his tales. Mom being shy and having a terrible stammer that also really was a major fact of his life. So the stammer, the homosexuality, he kept the homosexuality hidden from his public fiction, from his public anything. Everybody knew it. I mean, everyone knew it at a certain point. But he did enter into a marriage, despite that, I think, or preceding his full awareness of that, or something. The timeline was such that it kind of overlapped. But he tried to have a conventional life, and that ended up causing him nothing but terror. And his ex-wife ended up being nothing but a problem. And I don't think it was entirely his fault. And he was neglectful of his daughter as a result. And a lot of the hatred of him is connected simply to a contempt for his homosexuality. So I'm the last person to be able to hold that against him. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, because he was still writing. I mean, he's kind of a bridging figure in that he kind of comes out of the end of the Victorian era and into the 20th century, and it's sort of like there's still this sort of moral valence to the criticism of him that's sort of not always like it's always unspoken. No one ever like outs him or anything like that. But the idea of his his daughter and stuff like that, like he was the worst little husband who ever lived.
Exactly.
And that's why he was sort of criticized a lot. I think there's a lot of that energy in the criticism of him.
There is. It's very strong.
And jealousy of his sort of success. Like he was wildly successful basically in every form that he worked in. And I'm glad you mentioned the American who he sort of Florence Nightingaled into his life, because I was reading about that, and I got a lot of Rosie Driftfield in that, like, 'cause I got that sort of vivaciousness, like, and that was a nice little touchstone.
Yeah, it was, the hatred of him now, I think, is especially vile, as much as he may have deserved it in certain specific instances and actions and behaviors. I mean, he clearly was an absentee father, but we know why. I mean, he was and his wife was not a good woman from what I recall. It's been a minute since I read the biography, the definitive fat most recent one. It's been a while, but as I recall, his wife was pretty, and I don't blame her necessarily, because, it turns out your husband is gay. It's never an easy thing, but she wasn't nearly as forbearing as Oscar Wilde's wife when faced with an even more humiliating kind of, Oscar Wilde's wife had it much worse, from as I recall, and it feels like Mom's wife was much more manipulative about the whole thing. But whatever it is, it was an unpleasant, ugly situation, and it was used against him by those who are envious of his wild success and of the the general freedoms of being a practicing homosexual events compared to the normal heterosexual life. But he was extremely tortured about his sexuality, more than anyone need be. I mean, and he was, as he puts it in his book multiple times, he has never known the bliss of requited love. Gerald never really loved him, and neither did whoever else he might have. Gerald was the love of his life, and mainly, and there was a few others, but he was no fool. I mean, you could play him a fool if you were someone like Gerald, but he knew the difference. He would always, anyone he'd sleep with, he would reward with like a gold cigarette case afterwards. His next after Gerald died like in his early 40s, and then after him there was another guy who was his secretary and who was his lover for a while, and then who like bounced around, came back, and he was really also, he was also, he was very good in some senses for him, but in others, he was another scheming bottom who really caused a lot of havoc. I mean, that's the thing. A lot of the havoc that Mom is blamed for was really, I won't say who because I don't want to, but it's a syndrome we know all too well. It's the Bosie syndrome. It's the scheming bottom thing that they tried to kind of manipulate and take over the entire life and be the person in charge. I forget the name of the second guy at the moment, but there are multiple of these people, and that's part of the reason that the bad reputation ricocheted onto Mom. But the bottom line is that he's absolutely right when he says, I had more brains than talent and more character than brains. He was a man of very strong character, very strong discipline, and that is how he achieved what he achieved. His talent was not as overwhelming, and you can tell that from reading him. I mean, he's not a dazzling type of writer. He's not someone who's like knocking you off your chair. He never does that. He simply he squeezes the absolute most out of his talent, his intelligence, his observational skills, which are very strong. He understands people. He understands men and women, mostly men, but also women. And he doesn't cloud his observations with judgment. That's one of his big strengths, especially at the time he was writing. He's able to relay things in a kind of neutral way that was ultimately shocking to his readers. He has stories about incest. The book bag is about incest. I don't know if you read that one, which has a very elegant opening where he's talking about his addiction to books. And it all leads up to the person he's staying with asking him if in his bag, seeing that in the big book bag he carries around with him on his travels, there's this slim little Life of Byron. And his guest asks him for that, to borrow that for the evening, and later tells him the story of this incestuous brother-sister couple in the whatever aisle that they're at. He talks about incest. Rain, obviously, was his first big success. I think his first short story in his prime mode. He wrote a few stories where he didn't know what he was talking about. He disavowed them. I think they're in the Tales of the South Seas, that first collection of his. He disavowed those stories as being bad. But his first good story was Rain, and that's another one about very very sexually controversial subject matter, and he's able to very elegantly and carefully tell stories with quite a shocking subject matter in a way that now read today would be very delicate, would seem somewhat delicate, but you could see how shocking and they would have been at the time. And now I don't mind their delicacy at all. I mean, it's not going to knock you off your chair, but it's very pleasant to read. It's just you can read him and just not stop reading him. He's very easy to read.
And he I like that you said before about he's got, what was it, more brains than talent and more character than brains or something.
Yeah,
like
more
that.
character than brains.
Yeah. So increasingly, I've said this on our podcast a couple of times lately, increasingly I'm of the opinion that talent is sort of a necessary condition, but I think people fetishize it too much, that what you actually need is what Mom's got here, which is this keen sort of lucid sense of observation, of like understanding of people, and also this kind of workmanlike production line sort of process, I guess, rather than just sort of sitting back and letting the spirit of belles lettres sort of possess you or whatever, and you have to do the pyrotechnics, or he has none of that. He's not doing literary pyrotechnics. He's observing directly and very clearly, and like you said, when it's something kind of morally or politically charged or something like that, he does it delicately, but you never get the sense that he's doing it because he's afraid of the subject matter or the repercussions. He's doing it because he's treating the subject matter with a kind of yeah, it's a carefulness that's not from fear, it's from getting it right, like seeing it in a crystalline way.
Yeah, seeing it that way, and also just very effectively communicating it to an audience that so that they can accept it, because he has a very pragmatic sense of what they can and they cannot accept. Like, he's writing to an audience. He knows he knows that you have to deal with the audience that you have, and you've got to put things in a way that they can accept, or in a way that they can not revolt against, and before it's allowed to seep into their consciousness and eventually be processed. That's just a practical way of doing it. I mean, he's not going to write fuck, 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 like Paul Thomas Anderson writes in his scripts, because his audience, like, they wouldn't get, those audiences, God bless them, wouldn't accept that as like, they just revolt. So so he's going to ease you into it. And he does it quite, and it's one of his unacknowledged gifts. He's very, very good at, he has the types of, his literary gifts are the kinds you don't notice. And that's why they don't get much remarked upon. And they're the kinds of gifts that are like, oh, well, there's a ton of storytellers. There's a ton of people who can tell a story. Yeah, there are a ton of people who can maybe tell a story. Maybe, I don't know, like in various medium. But there aren't a ton of people who can tell a story that are also smart and who also have something to report about human nature. Yeah, to say. He has something to say. He has a lot to say. And he's also very good at telling a story. Those two things are not seen in too many people. They're just, and he points this out, like, why would they be? Why would the ability to put something in a way that carries it across the footlights be married with an original mind or thinker? Like, why would you expect these two things in the same person? They're entirely different talents. And so it's no wonder that, they've not been seen in too many people. And in his case, there is enough of each to make him readable even to this day, despite the fact that his style is definitely, it's definitely like, it's an older style. Like, he's not writing, it's like reading Hazlitt or Hume or something in his day was. It's like you're reading an obviously an elegant, Raymond Chandler put it, a kind of Mandarin style. It's not really like visceral. It's not like punching you in the stomach like Hemingway might be able to punch you, but it's still readable because it's very lucid and it's very subtle, and he knows how to work a sentence to make you, to keep you, like, he knows how to keep you going in a sentence. He knows how to drop things in the right, put the right words in the right place so that you're kind of, you get it. They have their effect and you move on. He's prone to cliche. He's prone to like hackneyed phrases. He's not much of a phrase turner, but he can be quite aphoristic. He's like, there are a lot of like, her heart went pit-a-pat. Little things like silly things like that when trying to describe a horny pang or whatever. But those are ultimately very easy to get by. They don't trip you up. I mean, they're just hackneyed phrases. And I actually think that his ability to tell like a very simple simile or metaphor is somewhat underrated. He thinks he has very limited powers of metaphor, but when he uses them, they get the point across. I think they get his very like commonsensical point across. I've jotted some of these down that I can perhaps employ to make to justify what I'm saying.
Quoted here that I found like really funny as well, like a metaphor. It was talking about Rosie Driftfield towards the end when he's defending her to Driftfield's new wife, where he's like, she was like a clear, deep pool in a forest glade into which it's heavenly to plunge, but it's neither less cool nor less crystalline, because a tramp and a gypsy and a gamekeeper have plunged into it before you.
Perfect. Yeah, exactly.
That's
Exactly.
a beautiful.
Like, that's
Yeah.
great.
He has a lot of
It's kind
those.
of it's kind of bawdy as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah.
In an understated way. But,
Yeah.
yeah.
He had another one yeah, exactly. So when he uses these, it's like no one would quote that, you know? No one would have like, but it gets the point across perfectly. And he had the same thing with like when one of his last things he ever wrote about like fearing death when he's really old. He said something like, no one ever quite we all know intellectually that we're going to die, but nobody ever until being, you know, until given like an actual prognosis, like, you know, prognosis of death, nobody knows that they're going to die in the same way we know that if we walk outside in the rain, we'll get wet. We don't have the knowledge doesn't live with the same kind of. He made that, you know, that just that little simple metaphor is helpful. Is true. Like it's true that we cannot appreciate the reality of our death with the same level of actuality that we do, you know, the weather outside. It's impossible. And yeah, so these are I'm just laying out these gifts, and I think that's kind of what makes his nonfiction so good. And I don't know why it's as underrated. A lot of people read the Summing Up is a well known and popular book in his day, but his other nonfiction is also really good. His books of essays are really something, and he's also a humorist, as he kind of calls himself a number of times, in a way that's not like a try-hard humorist, but just as his general disposition toward life. He actually has some really interesting, again, even about that, you know, he says, for example, if I can find it here, he comments about the defects of a humorist, of having a sense of humor. Oh shit. 1 second. See if I can find it. The humorist has a quick it's page 65. I have no natural trust in others. I am more inclined to expect them to do ill than to do good. That is the price one has to pay for having a sense of humor. A sense of humor leads you to take pleasure in the discrepancies of human nature. It leads you to mistrust great professions and look for the unworthy motive that they conceal. The disparity between appearance and reality diverts you, and you are apt, when you cannot find it, to create it. You tend to close your eyes to truth, beauty, and goodness because they give no scope to your sense of the ridiculous. The humorist has a quick eye for the humbug. He does not always recognize the saint. Now, you can pass over this very quickly when you're reading, and you're just like kind of reading real fast, but then you like slam the brakes and you go, wait a minute. This is actually more. He's telling you more than, he's not just brushing things off. Like, he's telling you that the problem with the current little comedy clown problem we have, where everyone's a comedian and you're supposed to worship what they say, and and the reason why they're so kind of wrong about so many things, because they're trapped in that thing, you know, where they
discussions about the art of comedy as well, and how
those are the worst. I've been screaming about the art of comedy. I've been just screaming about those onanistic, masturbatory dissections of their craft for years. Because imagine if magicians did that. They've completely destroyed. They've completely like dissected the frog of their little racket for all to see. No one cares anymore. It's disgusting to talk about the guts, the bladder, the liver of the frog you're supposed to be dangling out before us every night. So they've done that, which is a shitty thing. But more to the point, the reason that, like, for example, they've all been they've all failed with Donald Trump. They've all failed with Charlie Kirk. They've all failed with these big moments that we've had throughout the last 10 plus years, is that they're trapped in this very limited pattern of observation and perception, where everything has to balance out to both sides. It's like the problem we've been talking about with the dirtbags and the Tim Dillons and all that. Everything has to be both sides, not just because of political cowardice, but because they're trapped in this sense of this kind of like prison of the ridiculous of life, and he clocks it right there in himself as a defect. Although he does not suffer it to anywhere near the degree that, we see before us today.
Yeah, well, I think he's more self-aware of his own. I mean, he's all self-aware of all of his limitations, and he admits it. And with the humorous stuff, like, yeah, that line is perfect about not being able to see a saint when it's in front of you, because your entire worldview is about cynical both sidesing everything. So like that saintly woman that you encountered, oh, she's just doing that for whatever cynical reasons, or that's always the default kind of position of all of these people. And so that's the only way they can react to everything. And they do react to everything. So like,
yes, they react to everything. They be reacting.
They do be reacting, yeah.
Well, so the reason I also had you guys read Cakes and Ale versus, like, say, the short stories, which I think if you're, my advice to people is these are these two books, the short stories, all 4 collections. They're in Penguin puts them out in like 4 volumes. Some of them are better than others. Some of them are much slighter than others, and some of them are really good. Some of my favorites include Macintosh, for example. I think that's a really good one about a lot of them are very like politically valuable in my opinion. I mean, Macintosh being one. There's some very strong conservative kind of just notions that are being captured in this analysis of colonial behavior, of the petty rivalries, of how certain characters who seem harsh and brutal are often actually the most good and selfless, and how others who are most high-minded and virtuous are actually pieces of shit who end up destroying everything. Like that's Macintosh is about. And there's others like that too. And there's just like, some of them are just like, they depend on a kind of small little twist of character, which is always very pleasing. He learned how to write. He learned about stories from Guy de Maupassant, who when I had both of their collections from a very early age, and as Maugham and Maupassant, I always got them mixed up, which he would have loved because he really admired Maupassant. That's the kind of story writer he was. Like always like a kind of a twist of a very compelling story with a beginning, middle, and an end, as opposed to the Chekhov school, which is a very different type of story where things don't really happen. And it's just like, it just kind of ends without any conclusion. And that became really the dominant form of story writing in his time, which is another reason the critics kind of, weren't very kind to him. But he wrote a great introduction to one of his collections, a long introduction comparing Maugham and Chekhov as, and giving, certainly he has a lot of respect for Chekhov. But that's one of the best things I've read, best pieces of literary criticism I have read, period. And I have it it's like in an old collection. I don't even know exactly where to find it. It's great. So he wrote in the Maupassant tradition, and his stories are no matter what, they're readable. Some are better than others. Some are longer than others. Some are really short. His collection called Ashendon is probably the best place to start, because those are great. Those are spy stories, and they're probably the best spy story, like the best thing in that genre ever written. And they're based on his own life as a spy. In World War I, he was sent to Russia on a mission to prevent the Bolshevik Revolution. And in his words...
Based.
Yeah, based, exactly. And his words, if he got there 6 months earlier, he thinks he could have made a difference. But as it was, obviously it was a miserable failure. And he has a very, I had to write this down because he went to Russia with great excitement, to the land of Chekhov, Tolstoy, and Dostoevsky. But I came away disillusioned. The endless talk when action was needed, the vacillations, the apathy when apathy could only result in destruction, the high-flown protestations, the insincerity and half-heartedness that I found everywhere sickened me with Russia and the Russians. So true, Queen.
It sounds so familiar too.
It sounds so familiar. Really.
Yeah.
I read that and I was like,
yeah.
I was like, more borscht has been clocked yet again.
Well, yeah, Fresca will be interested in that side of his biography, I think, because he's a real Russophile. So,
what do you think of this, Matt Fresca? Did you know about this thing in his past? And
I know nothing of his autobiography. I literally Cakes and Ale is all I know, really. So I'm interested to find out. It sounds like a fascinating guy. And I should just clarify that I'm like a Russophile in the sense I just like the language. I noticed you pronounce Chekhov with the instead of a k. So I'm guessing you speak Armenian or Russian or something like that.
I speak Armenian, which has a similar ch sound. Yeah, I don't know Russian from.
Do they use
Nihuya.
Cyrillic and Armenian, right? The Cyrillic alphabet.
No, they're totally different alphabets.
Oh.
Yeah, Armenian is its own alphabet on its own branch. Okay. Yeah, but that sound is not a sound we have in English. The ch sound. No. That's why, like Anachachian. It's not Anachachian.
Yeah, I've heard you say that. Yeah.
So that's what
KH is always like ch. Looks like an X in Russian in Cyrillic, but I don't know how it looks in Armenian.
I don't even know. I used to know the alphabet, but I don't know it anymore. I'm such a.
I gotta look that up. I don't even know about Armenian.
But yeah, this is and my point is for the starter kit, the Somerset Maugham starter kit: Cakes and Ale, Ashenden, Summing Up, and then you can move on to all the short stories. And then I would recommend all of his nonfiction. Don Fernando. The Vagrant Mood is a great collection of 5 essays written late in life and also points of view. There's some really good stuff in there. He has an essay about the detective story that I read over and over again. It's great. He has an analysis of Edmund Burke's writing style that's great. He has a essay called Some Novelists I Have Known, which include Henry James, and it's great. Smart. It's really smart and just underrated in terms of just how Ray he is. Ray.
But right about everything, yeah. Isn't Cakes and Ale kind of part of the Ashenden thing? Isn't the main character
really Ashenden?
It is, yeah. It's Ashenden is his name for himself. He's Ashenden. Anytime the narrator of his stories is named, and it's like obvious, it's Ashenden. If it's like but it's not an Ashenden story because it's in the Ashenden stories are the spy stories. So like the Ashenden collection, they're all based on something related to espionage. I think the most famous. I like
the idea that this is like the prequel to the spy
exactly
story.
Yeah. He just Ashenden was his fantasy version of himself basically.
Yeah.
And I think the most popular story of the Ashenden stories is the Hairless Mexican. That's the one I think that's the highest regarded. It's quite good. But in Cakes and Ale you get the full package of his gifts as a storyteller and as a character analyzer and as like a tea clocker. There's a lot of good stuff in here about the literary world that's 100% relevant to today and the kinds of clout games and characters. And it also contains his sympathies for the deviant, the degenerate, what society dismisses in that way, in the form of Rosie Driffield. So let's talk about Cakes and Ale. What is the story of Cakes and Ale? How would you describe the kind of novel Cakes and Ale is getting lit?
Well, Fresca, do you want to take this, or do you want me
I was just gonna say, would it be considered auto fiction?
to?
Well, no, because that's an interesting
Because it's
point. You
good.
see, yeah, this is not autofiction. He makes some good points about autobiographical fiction, also in the summing up, right? But it's not autofiction because it's not based on like it's not just a reportage of something that happened in his life.
Yeah.
It's not just a reportage of like this specific event in his life. The characters are drawn from real people, for as all of his characters are, he says, but they're not drawn as they're not like carbon copies of those people. He gets an idea from it's like that's the reason this is so this is so alive today, is that he didn't just like write about a specific a person who's like this idiosyncratic specific human being that you can easily name. I don't think anybody can name who exactly Alroy Keir is, but he's so many people. He has so many authors, and it's certain that he got the idea from a specific author who has, and I can name versions of him today, who has that specific kind of hustler attitude. That literary hustler who just plays everything right all the time and is always there for you if you can help him, and is always gracious to all kinds of people when his graciousness will be noticed and to his benefit, and is perfectly sincere in all of it at the same time. It's a wonderful character. It's a wonderful character.
Yeah, I felt like he was respectful towards that character. Like he was sort of tipping his hat as a like game recognized game kind of thing, but at the same time, like being like, yeah, I can see what you're doing, you know.
Yeah, and like it's basically like he's basically a massive fraud. He's fair to him. He's fair to him being. I mean, it's a massive fraud. Alroy Keir is the point here, but it's like
Yeah.
so massive that you can only pay it its due respect for all that he's achieved through this like giant fraudulent operation that is his literary career.
Yeah. So yeah, Keir, what he wants to write a sort of biography or literary biography on this writer Edward Driffield, and he kind of knew that the main character Ashenden, I guess, knew him when he was younger, and so he wants to get the tea,
The
from,
tea of what
from
it
him.
was like, yeah, when his early days, yeah.
And so then, like, Ashenden obviously reflects on his early days and Driffield's first wife, Rosie, who is this, like, delightful character. So it's interesting because it starts out with this really great analysis of that kind of literary type, right? Like,
Alroy Keir.
because he goes on this, yeah, and he goes on this whole, like, extended sort of imagination of what a writer like that does. They're always seen at the right parties. They're always like there to like support someone. And there's always these little kind of like barbed sentences about. I should have highlighted one or two, but like about how it's always a little bit underhanded at the same time.
Yeah.
And so it starts out like that, and he has these reflections on the literary scene in this was early 20th century it's set, or is it a little
This
bit
is
before?
I think it's set in the present, which would be
Okay, yeah,
the
Like
present would
1930-ish. Yeah.
yeah,
1930, yeah.
yeah. So so there's, and then it sort of goes into his recollections of Rosie and Edward when they come to the village, which those are my favorite parts. Like the
Yeah.
literary scene stuff is hilarious and like really, really kind of lucid, like clocking tea and all
Yeah.
that sort of
Oh
stuff.
yeah. I love
But
that.
I love his I love Rosie as a character, and you're supposed to, I guess, but that's she is it's very intentional because she is the opposite of that kind of person. She's like really sort of like very openly sexual, like is just a good time gal,
Mm-hmm.
um, and says what she feels, but also it doesn't isn't like taking everything on as this like existential crisis. Like she's just really kind of but she's not flippant at the same time. She's sort of just like an easygoing lass. It's like my favorite kind of woman. Like pretty much the only kind of woman I like. But but like and I think Maugham very smartly, I think, juxtaposes that with the people in London who are in this literary scene where they care way too much about um, a kind of idea of, humanity and the arts or whatever, whereas Rosie just sort of lives it, and it's really lovely. I just like how he, who is the superior human here, and I think it's Rosie, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she's not like protective of her reputation, and
Yeah,
but then
yeah.
they're all like, because she's married to this like, you know, prestigious writer, they're all sort of trying to like get him away from her, even though he's
Mm.
like, and like, yeah, she does, well, basically fuck all of his friends. So she's, she, whatever, like, but yeah, she's just a delightful character, and yeah, like you say, just the opposite of Alroy Keir and all that, who is just super like protective of his reputation, and then he's just like, when Ashington's like, well, you could just write the like autobiography, what's and all, or whatever, and he's like, oh, but you don't want to be seen as this in the critical eye, kind of thing. Like it's just like, and then like the story of when it actually tells you all of the like actually interesting things about Driffield's life, whereas you gather that Keir's book would just like be so dry and have like nothing interesting in it.
Yeah, it would be the official hagiography. It would be like the official little thing, the hagiographical like approved thing that basically what Keir does. Keir is a total time server, basically, and that's another, that's also well demonstrated by this book. And the difference between this book and autofiction is that he's arranged all this into a beautiful story that is totally fictional. The characters are drawn from people he knows here and there. The environments are drawn from environments he knows here and there. The village is very much where he was sent to live after his parents died when he was 9, 10 years old. He was sent to live with his uncle, a vicar, who was probably exactly the way he wrote the vicar, his uncle in the story. The way he describes him in summing up, it's the same thing. So he took that environment that he grew up in, which he hated. I mean, not grew up in, but after his parents' death, he took his uncle, his like kind of, grouchy vicar uncle, small-minded, impatient, intolerant. He took that environment and he drew this interaction with these famous authors for potential, not at the time, not famous. At the time, as he makes very clear, like Edward being an author of the kind of books Driffield was, like he was sort of a unrespected bohemian in that village. So he's putting together all these elements that are from real life, drawn from real life, but he's arranging them with the art of a storyteller. It's not, he didn't have such a friendship when he was actually a kid. He didn't have an affair with a famous writer's whorish wife, and of course the invention of the big reveal of where that whole thing began, and how it was something that in which Driffield novel that was his big sensation is the one where a woman's baby dies in childbirth, and then that night she goes out and gets fucked and comes home the next morning, and from then on it's this situation. It was after the tragedy of the death of their child, and another, I mean, also the career of Edward Driffield is also perfectly, it's another great satire of the literary world. He's this guy who just kind of, as he puts it, his big talent isn't that he wrote all these books that were kind of whatever. His best book was the one in which he captured that incident about, that changed his life. And then the reason he became such a celebrated, like, grandpapa of letters, like Joan Didion, for example, did in her later life, is not that they discovered all these immense gifts in these books that were not there before, but rather that he just simply got old. And he needed, that role was there to be filled, and he filled it. And he filled it with the immense, on the back of this literary kingmaker queen, who, a society lady who made it happen for him, and whose first task was to separate him from his first wife. And there's a great line. I have to find it because I definitely took this one down. There's a great line that one moment, I'll find it. But yeah, if she, and so this she's talking about how Rosie Driffield was like tolerated, but barely, in the part at the on all the literary parties they were inviting Ed Driffield, as they were trying to make him a thing. So this literary society lady, if she praised Edward Driffield to her, telling her with a little mercy in her tone what a privilege it was to enjoy the companionship of such a great man, it was certainly from pure kindness, and not because she knew that there is nothing that exasperates the wife of a literary man more than to have another woman tell her flattering things about him. So this is just full of that, and it's a total delight. Yeah. So he describes the description of how Edward Driffield becomes a famous writer from just a kind of guy who's putzing around putting out tons of books is another all-time literary career archetype thing that he captures for us. His description of the whorewife, who turns out, well, spoiler alert, turns out to still be alive. And, he does not spill the details to Alroy Keir. He keeps it. And so it becomes a kind of tribute to that woman, this story, to the first wife. But in the meantime, it's a devastating story about the vanities of literary culture.
Yeah, and then with the second wife, like you said, she sort of pushes him into this role, whereas you get the sense that Rosie would do nothing of the sort. That like they would just live their lives and go on bike rides and have parties and skip out on bills and
right
shit like that. Like
right.
And then Rosie, of course, like you find out at the end of the novel, is she's decamped to the US, and yeah, she seems like she's still kind of having a ball, and
she's still fucking at 70.
Yeah, it's fucking and sucking.
She's fucking and sucking at 70.
Yeah. Good on her. Yeah, and whereas you have the second wife, who I kind of like that character. I kind of respect that character in a different way to Rosie, like that she's just making things happen.
Like she replaces his furniture subtly so he doesn't notice or something. Like I got a bit quite highlighted here. Is like Amy says it was simply awful. He wouldn't let her change a thing, and she had to go to work with the greatest care. She says she simply couldn't have lived in it, and she was determined to have things right. So she had to change things one by one, so that he didn't pay any attention.
Yeah,
but this is a perennial archetype too, like the woman who like molds the man. Like it's so good. It's just so like it's such a timeless like observation, Whereas
and he just wants to go to the pub and drink with the coal miners.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I just think it is a brilliant book and brilliant satire of the literary scene stuff. I do like. I'm very removed from literary scenes and stuff like that, so I don't quite always sort of see what's happening now. But you do see, unlike a lot of online stuff, there are resonances anyway with what happens online, like
Oh, tons.
episode was recorded somewhere between Australia. This episode was recorded on the air between Australia and Holland. Guest starring Matt Sini and Matt Fresca of the Getting List. Guest starring Matt Sini and Matt Fresca of the Getting Lit podcast.